to start with, setting some context of these 25 minutes presentation. I founded and studied chemistry in 2021, but I used to work over a decade for Nestle, which is, as you know, a big CPG company. So I've worked in the headquarters in Europe and then in the US, leading technology transformation across different functions. And the thing was interesting at the time, working in that field, is how hard it was to actually succeed in implementing emerging technologies to create true unique IP within organization. There's a lot of amazing, interesting projects we share with you where we failed. And one of the key factors that I've noticed at the time was there was a lot of resistance to change. And technology can be overwhelming. And most of the time we've seen people really struggling with understanding how this fit within organization, how does it affect their job, how does it affect the way you need to think about going to a market when they apprehend technology. So what we do a lot with chemistry is we spend a lot of time with our clients. So we spend a lot of time talking about the metaverse because it is important to create a common language. Everything starts with creating common language. Everything starts with being able to discuss about a fairly complex subject with different functions within an organization. And that's the first step for success. So, we've been doing this at different places like Nike. We did this with Vans, Crocs, Philips, very different types of organization. But really taking that time to talk about technology is important. So today, that's the reason why we're starting, is with the first to start this presentation, is to create a common language around the metaverse in the context of your industry, which is the entertainment industry. So what has changed really from the time I was working? That's a short span of time, which is really interesting, is that most of the projects we're doing were technology that were verticals within functions, working in supply chain, marketing, and sales. Whereas if you look in 2021, today, technology permeates every aspect of the organization, and it cannot be centralized within the IT department. I mean, if you still think technology within the IT department, then that's an obsolete model. It affects, as I said, technology is really a layer across all the functions of the company. And now, with the metaverse, we're expanding the boundaries of technology completely outside of the physical premises of organization. And that's what I can see very interesting and overwhelming. But, the metaverse should be looked as an opportunity to create true unique IP that can connect the story of your company, your brand, your franchise with your consumers. So what we will share today is some key elements that can be actionable for entertainment companies to start thinking really of the metaverse through the lens of storytelling. What is the relationship between these technologies, these new technologies that are the metaverse, and storytelling? And that's what we're going to be talking now. So again, with chemistry, so innovation as a service studio, we have a division that is focused on AI-driven consumer insight. That's actually the connection with Yves Berquist from the ETC. We've been working a lot with him on that subject. We also have an FT Metaverse Studio. That's where we work with organizations to build experiences, to build a strategy, actually to build a presence in these new layers of the world. We do a lot of digital experiences design also, like how you activate a physical space with digital experiences. And we have a 3D product creation studio. So having said that, let me introduce you to Rachel Victor, who's going to be leading this conversation. Rachel?
Thanks, Eric. I'm really excited to be here today. It's great to be working and talking about these new technologies, but as they relate to storytelling, especially because that's where I started. That's what I really love at the end of the day. My background is computational neuroscience. I studied the science of the brain to understand better storytelling and how people relate to stories, especially in the context of emerging technology. I worked in media research and strategy for a while and moved into the space of world building, really thinking about how stories are told across different formats, different mediums, and the way that shapes the story experience for individuals. So when we're talking about the metaverse, it's really interesting because now we have this new language, this whole new layer of thinking about what stories can look like. And even though this is now a new space, that when we talk about the metaverse, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of words that are used. There's it's honestly a space of optimism, and we see this space where it really is reshaping the way that we think of storytelling and what storytelling can be and what an entertainment company and a storytelling company can be like. But to return to Eric's point of a shared language and a shared vocabulary, it's really helpful to kind of define our terms. And so when we talk about these terms that are part of bringing the multiverse to being and what makes up Web3, there are a number of terms that get mentioned and they can mean a lot of different things. We're just going to quickly walk through what some of these definitions can be as a starting point for kind of shaping a shared vocabulary. So when we talk about the metaverse, this is one definition. We really like this because it speaks to kind of some of the nature of what the metaverse can be, right? The metaverse is an expansive network. It's a network of devices, of platforms across the spatial web, things that are connected and devices that are connected in the physical world, as well as the virtual world. And this network allows interoperability, right? The movement across these devices in a cohesive way. It involves real-time rendered 3D worlds, continuity of identity and objects. That means that who you are in one space continues into a different space. And it can be experienced synchronously. So we don't see this completely now, right? This is something, some elements of this are still, we're working on the technology solutions to allow people to inhabit the shared virtual space or the shared metaverse space together in an unlimited way. But these are some of the features of what makes up the metaverse. And so when we talk about the metaverse, we're thinking about this decentralized evolution of the internet. So moving beyond what we see as digital to Web3, we're thinking about experiences that are immersive, so that are playing with 3D space and embodiment in virtual space, things that can be persistent. That means an action that you take has some permanence within the context of these virtual worlds and the metaverse spaces. It's continuous and interoperable. Actions that you take in one space and through one platform continue into other spaces. And it's co-created. That means that there's shared ownership, there's shared ability to make and do in this space. And of course, multi-platform, each of these pieces, being accessed through your phone, through a virtual reality device, through your browser, through whatever other technologies like smart speakers, smart watches, this whole internet of things and devices. But what's really at the core of it is that this entry point into the metaverse is identity based. That means that within this space, every individual is interacting has a sense of digital personhood. And so these characters and identities that populate the virtual space allow individuals to have virtual identity, to create their own avatars, to choose how they represent themselves, to interact both with other real life people and with AI characters, with virtual beings. I know we'll be talking about some of that later today. But it's really reshaping the relationship of what it means to be an individual with relation to content and consuming content. Another aspect that gets talked about a lot in terms of Web3 is this idea of NFTs. I think a lot of the conversation now around NFTs centers around thinking about some beautiful digital asset that you compete to purchase to own. But really what NFTs allow beyond that is ownership of a digital asset that's authenticated via the blockchain and a smart contract that governs ownership and transactions, so that individuals who own can track ownership even if they sell the object. And because it's a digital asset, we're seeing obviously a lot of beautiful art that's within the NFT space. But because it's a digital asset, the item that's being sold can really be anything. It can be a game, it can be a movie, it can be a piece of code, an AI character. And NFTs are really a way of thinking about changing our relationship to ownership within the context of Web3. Another term that gets mentioned also is social tokens, and I know we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the next talk, but it's another aspect of the metaverse that's really related to thinking about using the blockchain and smart contracts as a way of authenticating engagement and shared community and co-ownership of spaces. So that's, just a quick definition of some of the terms and things we'll be talking about. We're going to hear, I know a lot more about that in the talks to come, but these are some of the components and things that make up Web3. But it all leads us to this question, right? What does it mean then to be a storytelling company in the age of Web3? These are all technologies that aren't just limited to, we can't define them in the way that we can define some other technologies, right? When we talk about virtual reality, we can talk about it as a platform, we can talk about the experiences it supports. When we talk about Web3, we're talking about something that, to Eric's point, it really is a very diffuse technology. It affects all layers of a company, it affects all layers of how a company operates, how content is created, how it's consumed. And so when we think about the Web3, we're really thinking about the way that content is changing. We're thinking about a couple of these things, and we'll walk through them really quickly. I know that we have well, a couple of minutes here, but we're going to try to get a kind of a picture of what this landscape means for storytelling. So one is the idea that content is ubiquitous. We're really just talking about how content is everywhere, right? It's no longer limited to entertainment companies creating stories. Everyone is in the content making and storytelling business. Brands are creating product that tell a story, and it's no longer just physical product. It's continuing into the NFT space with virtual product. They're experiential companies that are creating physical and virtual experiences. And so there's this assumption of content creation and entertainment experiences that are really everywhere when you look around. And it's not just storytelling companies. And this is afforded again by the fact that we have these range of devices that are creating platforms through which we can have new formats of storytelling. So as we see technologies evolve, we're not just seeing new ways of accessing content, but also new types of content that tell a story, right? So beyond film and television, we have VR experiences, we have MMO games, but we have also stories and pieces of content that are told through something like a Snap story or a blog post. So the nature now of how people are consuming story and content is evolving. So as we think about these evolving formats, it's really there's some challenges that arise from that, right? Because we're no longer just thinking of new ways of storytelling. These new formats are really changing the way we think about producing content, the way that we think about distributing content. When we talked about movies, we could have some assumptions, a while back about how people would consume movies. They would go to a movie theater and they'd watch a movie, and then maybe they would buy a DVD and they'd watch a movie. And then now we have streaming, right? That blows open the options through which people can access content. And as the evolution of formats expands the way that content can be distributed, it also then expands the way that content can be monetized. And this is all leading to a paradigm shift where, because formats are changing, because we can no longer think of content as being these discrete units that are individually purchased, entertainment is evolving to something that is very experiential. And we've seen this over time, right? This isn't just related to Web3. As we look at, evolution from movie theaters to television to people consuming content on their phones or laptops, there's this increasing personalization of content. I have, as a consumer of content, I have more ownership and choice over what I get to consume. But there's also this decreasing socialization. As something becomes more personalized in these formats, there's less of a social element to when I watch something in a movie theater and could see everyone's reaction to something, to me watching something alone in my phone or on my laptop. And where we see the metaverse and Web3 kind of evolving all of this is that there's a new side to this where, yes, you can have a very customized experience, because we were talking about the nature of identity and digital personhood. These virtual spaces can track and respond and be responsive in terms of the content that's delivered. So that's very targeted and customized to what each individual wants. But because of this element of identity, there's also this layer of socialization, which means that you can now co-participate in these experiences with other people. So it's allowing a customized experience that also has this whole layer of socialization. And as part of this transition that is very identity centric, we're seeing this evolution of interaction with content, and this has been happening again for a while, from a passive viewer to a participatory, a participant in experiences. And again, this evolution includes things like franchise storytelling, transmedia storytelling, where there are story worlds to explore. But now with Web3 and the metaverse, we're seeing more of a space for participants to co-create narratives, not just passively consume, to join communities, to purchase or own elements of worlds, not just, sit back and consume content. And what this affords us is really exciting, right? So we're moving beyond this 4-quadrant storytelling where we're very high level in how we're able to visualize and see individuals. But because of all the data we have, we can now really engage with the range and spectrum of ways that participants engage with content. So we're able to respond to the fact, for instance, that people engage with their stories in different types of ways and want to play with story in different ways. Some people really care about knowing all of the history of a story. Some people want to just be very social and have an experience with other people that they know. For others, it's about having ownership and collecting and owning all the artifacts of a world. And in this space, there's really the ability to respond to that diversity of experience and the types of experience that people want to have. And this is a growing assumption also from a consumer side, where consumers are used to engaging with content in a way that matches their needs and their wants for engagement. And it's coming over now into the storytelling side in terms of how people want to engage with their story experiences. And so that's where we see this evolution to story as more of a narrative experience. So when we think about stories now, and again, this is part of a progression over time. Stories exist within the context of story worlds. They're no longer, something that's isolated or that exists in a vacuum. When we think about story worlds, we're thinking about what is the context in which a story exists in terms of the world and its governance, its infrastructure, its culture that gives rise to this story. And these story worlds are then made up of systems, of relationships between characters and entities. And the great thing about story worlds is that because they are so rich and so dense in terms of how they support narrative, they can really give rise to storytelling across mediums. So you can have a story that springs up with certain characters that is told through a VR experience, and some of those characters are then seen on a TV show or show up in a YouTube video. And story worlds and this assumption of storytelling ensure that the way that you tell a story can expand based on the audience expanding, based on the different types of engagement. And it allows for that expansive experience, for that targeted experience where individuals can choose how they want to engage and in the way that works for them. So we talked before about how there's a range of ways that people want to interact with story. Now, as you have a story world that comes to life across different formats, everyone can choose their entry point into the story world based on the type of engagement they want, based on the types of stories that speak to them. And again, so this evolution has been happening for a while. 10 years ago, we were talking about this in terms of transmedia storytelling, and we've talked about it more recently in terms of franchise storytelling. So this idea of a story world spawning content across formats that individuals can engage with based on what works for them isn't necessarily new, but where we're seeing this evolution with Web3 is to this idea that the world is the product. So story is still an important element, but the world is now coming more into the conversation from a consumer standpoint. So we look at this in the case of everything that we know about story worlds and the way that story worlds are created in terms of systems and relationships now can come to life in terms of these volumetric worlds. So they're no longer, story worlds are no longer just these series of relationships. They're really a space that can come to life and be explored through 3D objects, 3D characters, 3D spaces. And what this means is that these volumetric worlds can now be responsive. So responsive meaning if an action takes place in them, the world can respond in kind and evolve over time. They can be persistent, as we see in MMOs, like in this image of EVE Online, where the actions that an individual takes within this world shapes the world. It stays within the context of the world. It's not like the world resets, but the world is then evolving over time, and it can be cross-format, which enables the worlds to then come to life across these formats that we've been talking about. So when we talked before then about formats and how they're not just shifting storytelling, now with Web3 and the metaverse and volumetric storytelling, we're really seeing how the space, for example, becomes a context for production and changing the way we think about production. So the same 3D volumetric world can be used in some contexts, or obviously there are technical challenges and there's a translation that happens, but can be used across MMO games or VR experiences, or can be used in the context of virtual production for filming of TV shows. So we see this evolution in terms of production, but then we're also seeing this evolution in terms of access to content and the distribution and monetization side. So these spaces are now also platforms for interaction and co-creation. So it's not just that they're on the back end enabling the creation of content, but they are on the front end something that individuals and viewers and participants can engage directly with. So they can create an avatar and engage directly with the world. They can purchase digital product. They can choose to pay for experience. And so as these formats evolve, the range of things that can be monetized within the context of the world are evolving too, so that individuals can participate and purchase things directly within the context of the world. And so this is where we're seeing, for example, that syncing between the conversation about the metaverse and the conversation about NFTs, because the metaverse creates the space to play, but NFTs can govern access and can govern ownership in terms of how individuals can choose to participate in this space. So because the NFTs are a digital asset, the NFT that an individual purchases or the digital product that someone purchases can be related to their digital identity and their access to these virtual worlds. It can be related to owning their virtual house. It can be a ticket to participate in a virtual experience in the context of these virtual worlds. But in combination, we're seeing then that in Web3, we have the metaverse, which is reshaping, and then NFTs, which are and digital product and this new way of ownership that are evolving the way that that experience is then monetized and engaged with and productized in some way. So when we come back to this question that we started with, which is, what does it mean to be a storytelling company in the age of Web3? It's really about this evolution of formats, right? It's a confusing time because there's no longer these shared assumptions of what is content, what are people purchasing, where is the business model. That's completely upended. But that's also a cause for optimism, because now there's a wider than ever range of ways that individuals want to engage with their story, want to be able to participate, want to be able to co-create. But to truly engage with this space, it really needs to be done in a very holistic way, to the point that Eric said, a lot of these technologies and these assumptions about technology can no longer be localized to a technology division, because it's not just changing the technology of how something is created or the technology side of a company, but these evolutions are really changing the very nature of how people think about what story is, how they participate. It's changing the way that that story moves into being produced and being made and interacted with, into how this content is thought about in terms of distribution, monetization. And so essentially the pieces to kind of wrap this up that are part of the shift is, one is the shift that we've seen coming for a while, right? The evolution of content to no longer be stories, but be about engaging with story worlds, story universes, franchises, things that continue across formats. Second, we're seeing this progression now to of the story world to a space that's actually 3D and can be interacted with and lived in. Third, we're seeing the way that this space spawns and influences the way that content can be produced. And then those pieces of content can be, a consumer can tap into that content and interact with it. But also now they become a space for direct interaction and for engagement with the world itself. And it's an exciting time. There are a lot of still open questions. There's a lot of assumptions that are still being shaped on the consumer side. But at the end of the day, what is, I think, the overwhelming message, the takeaway that I've seen in conversations with brands, with companies, with individuals, is that there's really this optimism because now we have tools to really change the way we think about the process and the way that we tell stories. And we can think about stories now as not just a discrete experience, but a transformational experience that can be engaged with in a way that really speaks to people where they are when they are. And yeah, that's it. I think we did a bit of a speed run through a lot of different ideas. This is trying to give a quick overview as we head into, I know we have a lot more talks to come. But the goal is to hopefully get a sense of like starting vocabulary, how these can maybe be ways of reshaping the way we think about storytelling. And we're always excited to continue to have a deeper conversation with you.